It's wonderful to be with you this evening, and congratulations, Pieter-Louis, on being the #1 book at the moment. That's excellent. And one of the reasons, I think it's so is because looting can be so completely incoherent and omnipresent. So when you read any newspaper or online forum, it feels like it's everywhere. And I think what the book does is it brings coherence and understanding to what it is we're going through, and I think we're going through a very big moment. This Gupta family is at the center of it. So their story, Pieter-Louis, is quite a story. It starts in Bruma, at the Bruma Lake, the South African leg of it, and right now its epicenter is Saxonwold, #Saxonwold Shebeen, the site of numerous Zuma Must Go protests. Share that journey with us a little bit.
Yeah, I think if you kind of look at the way that their fortunes have so dramatically sort of improved and changed since arriving in South Africa, you're almost like sort of tempted to portray it in a work of fiction, or in a documentary. It's a family who wasn't dirt poor back in India. You had the Gupta patriarch, Shrif Kumar Gupta, who ran a pretty successful sort of collection of companies, the spice importing and so on. So they came to the first Gupta brother would have been Atul Gupta in around 1993, came to South Africa with a little bit of funding from the father, with the sort of explicit mission to come and set up shop in South Africa. The Gupta Empire as we know it today, which includes a member of the Gupta family that has a personal wealth of about 10 billion rand, if you look at the latest rich list that was released around last year, I think is a far cry from even their sort of grandest expectations back in 1993. So it has been, I think, for them even a dramatically surprising journey to the level of success they've reached now.
So I won't give too much of the delightful detail away, but from flogging computer parts out of a car boot, that's quite a journey. Another part I loved was the story of the wedding at Sun City of one of the daughters, I think. And in the course of that grandiose wedding, which had just followed the Waterkloof landing, a gas tank explodes, the gas tank that belonged to one of the chefs they had flown in. And Marita Fitzpatrick, the journalist you spoke to, says that moment symbolized something about this family. Share with our audience what that was.
Absolutely. I think the entire wedding to Fitzpatrick and to a couple of other people I've actually also spoken to who attended the wedding represented to them a little bit of a microcosm of what was actually happening in the rest of South Africa. And what I mean by that is that the Gupta family moved into Sun City over the course of that weekend and just took absolute control over the functioning of the entire sort of hotel precinct. They actually managed to bring in their own staff, local staff, South African staff were not allowed to work on and serve them food. So I think that kind of is very symbolic of the way in which they approach business. Not only sort of the management of their niece's wedding, but also if you look at the way they sort of take total control of a business situation, especially in their dealings with government, and these state-owned entities that they also trade with.
And I suppose they play fast and loose with laws and regulations.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the exploding gas bottle. I mean, that's such a relatively small event in the grander sort of Gupta saga, but I think it is kind of indicative of their sort of blatant regard for, rules and regulations. There were gas bottles present at that wedding that was apparently not supposed to be there. It wasn't checked. Doesn't sound like it complied to SABS standards at least. So you had a situation where literally one of the bottles exploded and a chef had to be, a flaming chef I might add, had to be taken off the scene, and I think he was pretty well done after that, I suppose, but it's actually, it does kind of hint at or show their approach to, or their respect for law and order and rules.
So the Gupta's family's narrative of themselves, as crafted by Bell Pottinger, among others, is of this black family who came here and have made good. They've done things that white business is not doing. They're employing journalists, they're employing mine workers. They are a new South African patriotic family. Their journeys from Saharanpur, Singapore, they bought this big flashy pad in Dubai, but they now seem ensconced here. Does that story, their narrative of how they see themselves, did any of your reporting show that to be true?
No, I think we try to be as far as possible fair in obtaining the sort of the other narrative. Oftentimes we do focus on the bad news, but it is our duty to sort of to expose malfeasance. That being said, I did go and look for hints of this story of the honest sort of immigrant family who arrives in South Africa with a dream of achieving success in a new destination, abounding with opportunities. And that tale, which they are very craftily spun, and sold to the public, or tried to sell to the public, is just quite simply at odds with the myriad indications of absolute state capture and corruption. I wonder how they understand themselves. So I remember at City Press, and many people complained bitterly, we had the story of the Guptas are gone, and this was maybe 1.5 years ago. They're not gone. Are they trying to establish themselves as a family with bases, this global, very wealthy family, like the Ruperts or like the Gateses or whoever? Is that their life, or is their fortune very much based here, very much based in our cabinet? I think, personally, if you kind of look at their journey so far, that report specifically on the sort of the late night exodus out of South Africa and the luggage being loaded on the aircraft, I think there was a hint of truth in it, in that I do believe that the family is at least entertaining the possibility that they might have to go and base themselves elsewhere at some stage. The heat is certainly being turned on. It is not only with from outside the sort of ruling alliance that the criticism is growing. We know that there's growing discontent within the ruling party itself over the way in which the Guptas have managed to take hold of the levers of power, So I think that sort of, that flight out of South Africa, the purchase of a mansion in Dubai, the promise at least to get rid of the shareholding in some of these Oak Bay related companies, to actually to sell all their shares in South Africa, that is kind of indicative to me of at least a plan B for them, which entails at least at some stage to go and base themselves elsewhere, not in South Africa.
So they've made a fortune, like you say. Atul Gupta now listed as one of the richest men in South Africa pretty quickly as well. They're close to many cabinet members, and the one I'm most interested in at the moment is the Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba. Are you able to shed any more light on that relationship? And then also just tell us about how do they make friends with ministers and presidents?
Okay, first of all, I think it's very important for us to kind of keep an eye on our new finance minister. Obviously, he's sitting in a vastly important position right now, and it is very concerning that there has been for a while, there has been these indications that he does, that he has this kind of connection or allegiance to the Gupta family. We know there are visits to, I think he admitted to one visit, at least on the record, that occurred during a Diwali festival at some stage. There was an early intelligence report, I think circa 2011, that listed Gigaba as one of the regular visitors to Saxonville, to the Gupta's residence in Johannesburg. So I think there's, if you look at sort of the background of them cozying up to important people in government, and then deriving very real benefits from those ties, and if you now consider where Gigaba is sitting now, I think that is more than sufficient cause for concern. As far as kind of how their approach is to in cozying up to government, I think it's they're sort of their number one, which is President Jacob Zuma. There seems to have been a very early insertion of a member of the Zuma family into the Gupta business empire, which is Duduzane Zuma, as far back as 2001, actually, when he started as a trainee computer manager at Sahara Computers. So that I do find very interesting. There's kind of like benefits flowing between the two families.
the son is the father, that all the fortune that Duduzane Zuma has accumulated, and it's a fortune of vast millions, tens of millions, do you think that that is really placeholding for his dad?
I think the proximity between somebody who's deriving a vast amount of financial benefit from the Guptas and the father who is at the helm of the country and making all these important decisions. I mean, he literally has a say in who gets appointed to these state-owned entities from which the Guptas derive so much wealth. I think the proximity is just too close for comfort, quite frankly.
So the cover is really beautiful and the book's really good, but on it you've got the Guptas as the puppet masters and the president as the puppet. So I've wondered a lot if that's not an inverted relationship, that in fact our president is so Machiavellian and cunning that actually he's had puppets all the time, many of them Indian, Shabir Sheikh, who else? Shabir Sheikh, the Guptas, Vivian Reddy.
Roy Moodley, yeah, there are quite a couple of them, yeah. That's a very good question, actually. Now, I think definitely, the sort of idea behind that cover is definitely sort of the indications of late that the Guptas are the one who summoned people to Saxon world, and then President Zuma is present to ensure that whoever is there to sort of to be appointed in these key positions. You know, we look at Fakey Mentor and the whole BC Jonas saga. That seems to have indicated that the Guptas are the people doing the string pulling. But knowing President Jacob Zuma as the master strategist that he is, you know, the absolutely cunning chess player that we've known him to become, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a bit of a reciprocity in that's my second language, sorry, in that relationship. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a bit of tit for tat. He probably, given his intelligent background, I'm sure he's got some very interesting information on the Gupta family that he can also at some stage use as a knife to their throats.
So they seem to hold each other in this mutuality, that they have a lot on him and possibly the president has files on them as well. Eh?
I think it's not a friendship in the traditional sense of the word. I think there's definitely a stack of cards that each of them hold on the other party.
So I'll save this one for last and then we can open for questions. So I love the opening of the book because it captures the theories of state capture very well. But I'm worried about all our writing. It makes it feel like it's a very recent occurrence, that it just started when black people got into government. And I'm not paid by Bell Pottinger as part of that narrative, but I am studying it. Yet this is the method, state capture, cozying up to people in power, government contracts by which Afrikaans capital, mining capital. In fact, the history of the South African economy is written on systems like these. Don't you think we need to be a little more reflective of history in our writing so that it doesn't feel like this is a new thing, but in fact what it is a continuity of a system we didn't effectively break? I
absolutely do, and I was quite excited to see the publication of a book by, I think it's an individual called Hedy van Vuuren. It's a book that's recently released on sort of the very similar sort of, you know, predatory relationships between the apartheid government and big business. And by all means, you know, I really sincerely hope that the Gupta book and sort of the focus on the Gupta is only the start of exploring this issue of state capture, not the final word on it. We definitely need to delve back and see what happened in the you know, the previous regime, to understand where we came from and how we actually got here. So if it weren't for those furnaces that apparently went overtime, you know, back in the day when literally stacks and stacks of documents were burnt in Pretoria, we would probably have learned a whole lot more of what actually transpired during that phase of our history.